Welcome to DebtCircle Sundown Brief for the 14th of May 2026. Let's take a complete look at today's action across India's debt markets, money markets, government securities, currencies, commodities, and primary bond issuances. Starting with the top 5 highest yield listed corporate bonds traded today. Navi Finserv Limited recorded a yield of 19.37% with a trade value of Rs 0.10 lakhs. Berar Finance Limited recorded a yield of 18.68% with a trade value of Rs 0.03 lakhs. Navi Finserv Limited also recorded another trade at a yield of 17.83% with a trade value of Rs 0.01 lakhs. Kirtana Finserv Limited recorded a yield of 17.73% with a trade value of Rs 0.20 lakhs. Unifins Capital India Limited recorded a yield of 17.65% with a trade value of Rs 14.00 lakhs. Moving to the top 5 highest yield unlisted corporate bonds. Western Concessions Private Limited recorded a yield of 15.49% with a trade value of Rs 2,500.00 lakhs. Vadraj Cement Limited recorded a yield of 15.0791% with a trade value of Rs 707.00 lakhs. Devadarshini Info Technologies Private Limited recorded a yield of 15.00% with a trade value of Rs 13,300.00 lakhs. Apex Homes Private Limited recorded a yield of 14.00% with a trade value of Rs 4,192.07 lakhs. Devadarshini Info Technologies Private Limited also recorded another trade at a yield of 12.00% with a trade value of Rs 10,292.03 lakhs. Now let's look at mutual fund debt transactions. Gross purchases stood at Rs 11,829.06 crore. Gross sales stood at Rs 17,637.93 crore. Net investment came in at negative Rs 5,808.87 crore. Net investment for April month to date stood at negative Rs 26,249.750 crore. Turning to foreign portfolio investor activity in the debt market. Under the general limit category, gross purchases stood at Rs 356.12 crore. Under the voluntary retention route or VRR category, gross purchases stood at Rs 0.00 crore. Under the fully accessible route or FAR category, gross purchases stood at Rs 161.55 crore. Gross sales under the general limit category stood at Rs 64.37 crore. Gross sales under the VRR category stood at Rs 137.80 crore. Gross sales under the FAR category stood at Rs 175.17 crore. Net investment under the general limit category stood at Rs 291.75 crore. Net investment under the VRR category stood at negative Rs 137.80 crore. Net investment under the FAR category stood at negative Rs 13.62 crore. Net investment for April month to date stood at Rs 110.86 crore under the general limit category. Under the VRR category, month to date net investment stood at Rs 1,026.07 crore. Under the FAR category, month to date net investment stood at Rs 4,151.77 crore. For calendar year 2026, year to date, net investment under the general limit category stood at negative Rs 3,184 crore. Under the VRR category, year to date net investment stood at negative Rs 378 crore. Under the FAR category, year to date net investment stood at Rs 14,360 crore. Let's move to money market rates. The call rate stood at 5.22%. Tri-party repo stood at 5.05%. Basket repo stood at 5.10%. Special repo stood at 5.00%. Now for India government bond yields. 1-year government bond yield stood at 5.96%. 3-year government bond yield stood at 6.52%. 5-year government bond yield stood at 6.84%. 7-year government bond yield stood at 6.96%, 9-year government bond yield stood at 6.92%, 10-year government bond yield stood at 7.02%, 15-year government bond yield stood at 7.34%, 30-year government bond yield stood at 7.62%. Moving to Treasury bill yields and auction cutoffs. 91-day Treasury bill yield stood at 5.34%, 182-day Treasury bill yield stood at 5.53%, 364-day Treasury bill yield stood at 5.77%. Let's review liquidity indicators. Net liquidity injected stood at negative rupees 2,38,984 crore. Standing deposit facility or SDF stood at rupees 2,39,023 crore. Marginal standing facility or MSF stood at rupees 39 crore. Now for MIBOR OIS rates. 1-year MIBOR OIS stood at 6.11%. 2-year MIBOR OIS stood at 6.32%. 3-year MIBOR OIS stood at 6.47%. 5-year MIBOR OIS stood at 6.65%. Moving to modified MIFOR rates. 2-year modified MIFOR stood at 6.97%. 3-year modified MIFOR stood at 6.99%. 4-year modified MIFOR stood at 7.19%. 5-year modified MIFOR stood at 7.34%. Turning to currency markets. The US dollar to Indian rupee closed at 95.77 compared with the previous level of 95.67. The euro to Indian rupee closed at 112.10 compared with the previous level of 112.08. The British pound to Indian rupee closed at 129.40 compared with the previous level of 129.25. The Japanese yen to Indian rupee closed at 0.61, unchanged from the previous level of 0.61. The Chinese yuan to Indian rupee closed at 14.13 compared with the previous level of 14.08. Now let's look at commodities and benchmark indices. Gold 24 carat 999 purity closed at rupees 16,233 per 10 grams compared with the previous level of rupees 16,200. Silver closed at rupees 3,000 per 10 grams compared with the previous level of rupees 3,100. Crude oil closed at $105.43 compared with the previous level of $107.64. The Sensex closed at 75,398.72 compared with the previous close of 74,608.98. The Nifty closed at 23,689.60 compared with the previous close of 23,412.60. Finally, let's review today's primary corporate bond issuances in India. Kotak Mahindra Prime Limited issued rupees 500 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 60 months and a coupon of 8.00%. The issue was rated AAA by CRISIL Ratings Limited and AAA by ICRA Limited. IKF Finance Limited issued rupees 57 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 31 months and a coupon of 8.60%. The issue was rated AA- by India Rating and Research Private Limited. Nuvama Wealth and Investment Limited issued rupees 100 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 31 months and a coupon of 9.07%. The issue was rated AA by ICRA Limited. Navi Finserv Limited issued rupees 100 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 31 months and a coupon of 10.75%. The issue was rated A by CRISIL Ratings Limited. 361 Alternates Asset Management Limited issued rupees 62 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 36 months and a coupon of 0.00%. The issue was rated AA by ICRA Limited. RDC Concrete India Limited issued rupees 75 crore worth of bonds with a tenure of 31 months and a coupon of 11.00%. The issue was rated A by Acute Ratings and Research Limited. That's your complete DebtCircle Sundown brief for the 14th of May 2026. Stay tuned with DebtCircle for more updates from India's debt and fixed income markets.